Hey guys, this is College General Ming. Today I want to take a look at the Grand Marshal Jian from LK Chen. So first thing I should say is this sword was sent to me for review, but I will be sending it back, so I didn't purchase it with my own money. In addition to that, this particular sword was previously reviewed by Philip Martin at Aikidoka, his channel, and he's a very famous test cutter and competition cutter, and he sharpened the sword himself, so the cutting that you see me do in this video might not necessarily be reflective of the performance that you will get if you buy this straight out of the box. Though I should say that LK Chen has a pretty good reputation for sending fairly sharp swords, so I don't see any issues there. So this video is extra special because this is the first time that I'm doing a review of a Jian. Now, most of the time on my channel, I'm looking at Dao and sabers, and I think those are awesome, and my favorite types of sword, but let's branch out and do something new and take a look at this Ming Dynasty Jian. First, let's talk about the history of the different design elements on this blade, and then I'll go out in the back and I'll do some cutting and talk about the performance. In Chinese, this sword is called the Ming提督剑. Now, Ming refers to the Ming Dynasty, which started in the mid-14th century and lasted to the mid-17th century. Tidu is like a official, but in this context, it's referring to like a military governor or military provincial official. And I should say that in the Ming Dynasty, this position of Tidu, particularly in the military side, was not as codified and standardized as it became later on during the Qing Dynasty. But that's a topic for another video, and let's go on. So Jian means war, and Jian refers to a double-edged sword. Taking all this together, we can see that LK Chen is trying to recreate a Ming Dynasty Jian that would have been worn by a high-ranking official in the military. Many long-time viewers and subscribers of my channel will probably know that during the Han Dynasty, the double-edged sword, or the Jian, got replaced in the military by the single-edged sword, or the Dao, and that continued for the rest of Chinese history pretty much. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that double-edged swords never saw military use, and it also doesn't mean that the status associated with the Jian ever completely faded. Now, after the Han Dynasty, whenever the Jian found of large-scale military use, it existed in the civilian world and was sometimes worn by, civilian bureaucratic officials. And what this means is that it took on somewhat of a higher prestige over time, because in China, the civil bureaucracy enjoys a much higher level of respect than like military officials. And in a large part, that is because in China, they associate the past with, power and prestige and knowledge. And the civil bureaucratic officials in many ways were considered to be had better access to that legacy. But I don't want to get too far in the weeds for that. The main thing to know is just that during the Ming Dynasty, they conceived of the Jian as a higher status weapon. And that's why, to show off their prestige, some military men or military officials might, wear a Jian. And although LK Chen labels this as a Jian, in reality, during the Ming Dynasty, in the historical context of high officials wearing this type of thing, it's not very likely that it would actually be used for combat. We do have Ming Dynasty Jian that were likely used for combat, but those are much more rugged, simple design. And high officials in military or civil officials serving in the military both would not likely get their hands dirty, so to speak. When designing this sword, LK Chen incorporated many Taoist elements into the fittings. And let's start by taking a look at the guard. Looking at the guard, we can see that it's very large and it has this soft scalloped shape. And that's meant to imitate a lingzhi, which is a famous ingredient that Taoist alchemists would use in immortality elixirs and stuff like that. So that's a strong Taoist element. And I should say that whenever we're looking at artistic motifs on any kind of artwork or weapon from China, then we need to be aware of the fact that we have motifs which we can trace back over centuries and centuries. But the problem is we don't always know what every representation of a motif might look like. And even in the past, people may have looked at one thing and thought that it looked like two different motifs at once. This continues to go on whenever we look at the pommel or the Bing show. LK Chen has made this to represent a huluye, or a gourd leaf, because the gourd leaf is another Taoist symbol, and gourds in particular had a myriad of associations. For example, it could be used as a vessel to contain water or alcohol, and therefore, you could use it as a vessel to contain qi. And in addition to that, it has a goldish color. Gold is always associated with wealth and good stuff in China. So there's a long list of reasons why the gourd or the hulu is a very auspicious symbol. It should also be said that hulu or gourd leaves come in a very big variety of shapes, and some collectors might classify this pommel as a ruyi wen jianshou, which is, the ruyi is like a special scepter. And I'm not going to get into all the details, but basically it's a very common artistic motif in China, and some might interpret it to be more like that. Some of the fittings on the scabbard are quite a bit more obvious in my opinion. I think that it's fairly clear that these fittings here, which have the holes to suspend the sword, quite clearly have a leaf or plant motif. And I would also say that this also could be another hulu that's embedded into the design. The casting quality on these fittings is also not perfect. If you look here and there, you can see little imperfections in the brass where it hasn't been worked to a perfectly smooth or symmetrical design. Now, if I was paying $1,000 for this blade and it was like an Albion, then I would be pretty upset about it. But given that this is way less than half the price, I don't really see this as anything unreasonable. So the fittings and design of the sword have a pretty strong auspicious Taoist element going on. And now let's move on to talk about the blade. Like most Jian blades in Chinese history, this sword has a diamond cross section, and diamond cross sections can be quite stiff. But this one also has a fairly good degree of distal taper, which means that it's still a very good cutter. If we look at the tip, we can say that it's actually quite rounded. This is sometimes referred to as like a duckbill tip. It's difficult to say for sure, but I actually think that this might be a way to get a little bit more cutting potential out on the very end of the sword. As with all LK Chen blades, this one comes with a forged welded pattern steel, and the blade looks very nice. You can also pay more to get the Sanmei He, or the 3-plate lamination, where you have a hard steel plate surrounded by 2 softer iron slats going up and down along the blade. And that'll be more expensive, but it would be kind of cool. When I first picked up this Jian, it felt a little bit strange because it has very big fittings and a lot of mass in the hilt. Now, I'm more used to Dao, which are more blade heavy, and I'm used to using that weight in the blade to kind of help me maneuver my sword. But with this Jian, there's so much mass in the hilt that you're really manipulating the hilt and spinning the blade around it in many ways. But once I got used to that, it quickly became a very nimble, agile blade. And, the more I use it, then the faster and more quick it gets. As far as how Jian during the Ming Dynasty were used, we know very, very little. Even with the Dao, we don't know that much about how Dao were used during the Ming Dynasty. Most of our sources come from much later. And with the Jian, because it was not a military weapon, it wasn't as widespread, it doesn't have as many sources. And, during the Ming Dynasty, I don't know of any text that describes how single-handed Jian would be used. So the way you see me using it here is from Yang Taiji and Bak Mei, which I learned from Scott Rodell and Jeremy Thomas respectively. Now these systems are very much from the Qing Dynasty, and the good news is that this sword, its handling characteristics also very well map onto Qing Dynasty swordsmanship. I also know that some people like to hold the Jian up next to the handguard, but I found that this blade is much more maneuverable if I actually hold it in the middle of the grip. So if you're interested in the Ming Dynasty and you want to get a Jian that you can cut with, then I recommend checking out the Ming Tidu Jian. So that's it for this video, guys. Please let me know what you'd like to see next down in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching. Please subscribe and stay sharp.